Hey there, this is Gay Adelman with Save Our Schools and Dear JCPS in Kentucky. And I am going to put together a presentation that is intended for suburban Kentucky stakeholders who consider themselves left-leaning. In particular, this presentation is intended for those in suburban Kentucky communities who want to get involved in efforts to thwart the harmful legislation that is being proposed for the 2022 Kentucky General Assembly, currently and including the anti-CRT, the legislation that is being labeled anti-critical race theory. There is likely to be other legislation, so these are two bills that were pre-filed, so we know that this is a fight that is coming, but there will probably be other bills and other versions of this language. So we're getting organized and putting together a statewide coalition. There will be voter suppression efforts. There will be gerrymandering efforts. We have someone joining us. Let me see if I can get her in. Someone is messaging me saying that she's having trouble getting in. So I'm going to go ahead and just keep talking while I message her and let her know no one is on the call right now. All right. So, as I was saying, in addition to the anti-CRT legislation, these same ideologies masquerade around as anti-mask, reopen the schools, let them learn. We're going to talk about how all that ties together and focus on our efforts to continue the fight regardless of how they've packaged their essentially racist propaganda. These are ideologies that are pushed by, frankly, by those who are enabling white supremacy. And we see many of them in tied to the insurrection. We see many of them storming, just like they stormed the Capitol on January 6th. They're storming board meetings, school board meetings, and protesting in Frankfurt and other state capitals, and counter-protesting Black Lives Matter rallies, and positioning themselves as quote-unquote patriots and claiming that Trump is still the divine. Now they're even going so far as to really perpetuate this belief, this lie that Trump is ordained by God. And so we cannot sit idly by. This is urgent. This is necessary. This is not going to be for everyone. This work is not for everyone, but that's okay. We are enough. And I have a slide that is going to talk to that a little bit more, but I want to just show you. I am the chair for the Coalition for the People's Agenda Education Committee. We were born, I guess you could say, out of the People's Agenda that was formed in 2002, which was a coalition that came together when the city-county merger took place in Jefferson County, Kentucky, Louisville, Kentucky, because of the foreseen imbalance of power that was going to be created when the city and county budgets and schools and systems merged. And that has played out to be true. The the urban Black West Louisville populations have been harmed and underserved ever since. And there are 9 committees in the Coalition for the People's Agenda. Education is one of them. And so I am the chair of one of the subcommittees of the Coalition for the People's Agenda. And entities that have been coming to our meetings, we meet weekly on Zoom, off and on, depending on, we're restarting school right now, and we have a lot of teacher members, so we're kind of on a little bit of a hiatus. But we have been meeting by Zoom, and even before Zoom, the People's Agenda Education Committee was meeting at the Kentucky Alliance Braden Center, actually at 3208 West Broadway. I had been going to those meetings in person for probably about 2 to 3 years before the pandemic hit, and had the opportunity to meet with different grassroots organizations, leaders, individuals, members, affected stakeholders, Metro employees, elected officials, district leaders, state leaders, community neighborhood leaders, especially in West Louisville. There's a number of neighborhoods that have their own neighborhood associations. So much of this work has been influenced and initiated through those calls and those conversations and those voices. And so you can see some of the organizations. I'm co-founder and moderator currently for Dear JCPS. And we have over 6,500 members in our private Facebook group. We have 11,000 or more followers on our Facebook page, our public Facebook page. We were formed in 2015, July of 2015, when the repeated patterns of denial and gaslighting and corruption really were taking place, and stakeholders were being manipulated and lied to and told that they were alone and they were the only ones that were complaining about a certain issue. And my son attended West Louisville School, the Academy at Shawnee, and so I was also getting a lot of information and influence from educators and parents and students that were in my son's class. And so we didn't have a PTA, so I started one. And then that summer they pushed our principal out because he was willing to stand up for students essentially and stand up for his staff and not just continue the harm. He refused to just go through the motions that had been taking place all the years prior and just continue doing harm to students that attended that school. And so that summer he was pushed out, and we didn't have a principal, and I had just started the PTA, so teachers didn't have any leaders in the building to come to, so they came to me, sadly. And so another parent and I ended up organizing speakers at a board meeting. We started speaking at board meetings in 2013, and we were a regular appearance until we finally realized that this wasn't enough and we would need to be more official and more formal. And so we formed Dear JCPS. And Dear JCPS is a 501c4 that serves as the lead organization for the Coalition for the People's Agenda Education Committee. And I am also a co-founder of Save Our Schools Kentucky. We formed that in December of the same year because as we got Dear JCPS up and off the ground and started sharing stories and hearing other stories from other schools and other districts, we realized that this was really a veiled, the schools that were broken on purpose in Jefferson County in particular were really part of the privatizers and, as I mentioned earlier, the same people that are tied to the harmful things that are still being proposed in our legislature to this day. And it does extend beyond education, but education is where our work focuses because our students are our future, and they are some of the most vulnerable, and they don't have the same ability to stand up and fight for themselves as adults. And so they are being attacked through the systems. The systemic institutional harms and institutional racism and systemic racism is being exploited and cemented in our public school system in particular. And so that is the area where we have chosen to put our focus, and not just in Jefferson County, but across the state, because if we win a battle but lose the war, what have we accomplished? So we need to win the war. And I am also a board member. I serve on the Kentucky Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression board. The Kentucky Alliance is the longest running anti-racist organization in the state of Kentucky. It was originally founded by Ann Braden and Angela Davis and Bob Cunningham and Susie Post. And that was in 1974. And the Coalition for the People's Agenda in 2002 spun off from the Kentucky Alliance. The same Ann Braden and many of the same board members and leaders in the Kentucky Alliance were responsible for the Coalition for the People's Agenda's creation in 2002. And to this day, I can't speak for them because they are a nonprofit. I want to make sure that I'm being real clear that the content of this message is outside of the Kentucky Alliance. They are not responsible. They have not approved this message. I'm simply telling you the role I play and also some of the history. So I just want to make sure that that's been made clear. Other organizations that have been part of our coalition and team building efforts include LSURG, Louisville PTO, Kentucky Educators United. We're speaking with the Fairness Campaign currently about a tri-pronged approach to the anti-CRT legislation, because it does specifically mention equally. BR 69 mentions race, sex, and religion consistently throughout the bill. So we really need to make sure that even though race is what we know this is primarily about, it's not the only thing it's about. And it's intended to protect white, straight, Christian beliefs and uphold those beliefs and put a chilling effect on our efforts to elevate anything that is not in those three areas. So Fairness Campaign has expressed interest in helping us with a three-pronged approach, and also Community of Reason is doing the same in the faith area. And Community of Reason is a secular organization. We wanted to keep it neutral, but we have asked them to coordinate. We've asked them to coordinate getting responses and input and participation in that segment of the community by reaching out to faith leaders. We're not leaving faith leaders out. We want to be inclusive and structured in a way that is three-tiered umbrella approach. And so the Kentucky Alliance is considering a proposal to represent the race aspect of this campaign. So we also have Counselors Not Cops. I think I deleted, I must have hit something that deleted the rest of the language on that line, but it should say Counselors Not Cops, which is a student-led coalition that is focused on obviously reprioritizing budgetary concerns to make sure that we have the appropriate individuals responding to the students in our schools. Our budget is obviously limited, and police in schools is traumatic and is often used in many of our Kentucky schools to punish students who should really be counseled or redirected or and then we see that that happens at a disproportionate rate to our students of color. So we want to see police taken out of our schools because they're not utilized properly, and we have at the city level as well many concerns about over policing of our community, in particular our Black and Brown community members, and so that needs to be addressed. First, do no harm. Let's get rid of anything that's causing harm to our most vulnerable students and rebuild a vision of education that is supportive of all of our students and is a responsible way to spend our tax dollars. And Black Lives Matter and other organizations have also been attending our calls, and we support their positions in all of our messaging. So different things have taken place over the years since the 2013 really spark that I've been aware of. Many things go back beyond that, but I can speak to what I've witnessed personally. And these have all been grassroots campaigns that have been successful in stopping charter school legislation. Back in 2017, the bill did pass, but they've still not been able to get the funding mechanism all the way through. Although I think a lot of that has now changed, and we're just waiting for the fallout because some of the most harmful legislation was able to pass this last session while we were in a pandemic and unable to be heard. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. At the local level, we got rid of David Jones, who was our school board chair, who was protecting Donna Hargens, and Donna Hargens was doing the dirty work of the privatizers and the business leaders that really want to see public education dollars siphoned away from our community and put into the hands of greedy bureaucrats who have a different idea on quality education and who should have access. During that same school board race where we got rid of David Jones, which, by the way, we endorsed David Jones, and JCTA was silent on that race. And now JCTA endorses Chris Kolb, but they didn't the year that we were able to get him in office. We also protected other seats that were being sought after by privatizers in that 2016 and also in future elections as well. We've got a pretty good board in Jefferson County because grassroots local advocacy works. They did renew Hargens' contract prior to us getting rid of David Jones, but we were able to put pressure on and got her to step down as soon as we got rid of the board members that supported her. And we've been able to stop the state takeover of Jefferson County Public Schools. We didn't get our day in court, which we really would have preferred to have had because board members capitulated. And I think a lot of it has to do with the dirty truth that will come out when people start getting an opportunity to really poke around and dig around. And so they postponed the inevitable by compromising on the state takeover. But nonetheless, we didn't get taken over. It showed the public how evil Matt Bevin and his new commissioner had been. And so we were able to get rid of Bevin by shining light on all of these things and really mobilizing educators and parents and taxpayers across the state to recognize that Bevin was part of really that same ilk that we're currently fighting that I mentioned at the beginning. They think they want to restore Trump to power. They want to take away rights to vote for many people who don't look like them. And they want to keep their communities segregated and isolated from the rest of us. And that includes making their schools more and more elite and using our tax dollars to fund essentially private schools and religious schools that can indoctrinate their students and the children in their community to deny truth and science and fact. And so that's where we are. That's where these bills come in, and they work hand in glove. They're all part of a bigger puzzle that if they can chip away at these different pieces, then they can bring about the fall of education and ultimately our democracy and our freedoms. And there's talk on social media and on the internet that is extremism. And so we're going to talk about how to respond to that extremism as well. So the tax increase is currently being challenged in court, but we supported the tax increase with a Earn the People's Vote campaign that included some demands. We wanted to see an equitable student assignment plan, which we still don't have. We wanted anti-racism in our schools, which they are working for, but that includes the removal of police and budgeting for counselors and the things that we talked about. We want to see a resolution. The R is for a resolution in support of the movement for Black Lives, and a no in-person return to school until it's safe. And here we are a year later, and we are losing that battle. So it's really unfortunate that we are losing ground on some of these things that are so fundamentally clear. The science is there. The radicals are few and far between, but because they are not being met with appropriate responses, appropriate counter responses, they're growing. And so this is urgent. I know that I come across pushy and opinionated, and that's, I apologize if that turns people off, but we're not going to get everybody. If I can just reach a few people here and there who recognize the urgency of the situation, the work can continue. And for those who aren't ready for the message or don't like my style or my tactics or whatever, I'm sorry. But maybe my message isn't really meant for you. And when you're ready, we'll be here. So, take your time, find where you fit in, and we'll talk again in the future. The Louisville PTO is another story that I want to tell. These are campaigns that we witnessed, we experienced, parents of color in particular being shut out from the decision making at their school level. And many of our schools that are high minority populations have lost their site-based decision making council ability to choose a principal and select curriculum and set policies. And many others have seen their members manipulated through principals who have corrupted the election process at the school level. And so many of these things were going on, and I have been trying to draw attention to a lot of that. But in the meantime, my friend Latasha Harrison started Louisville PTO, and she's doing amazing work. And when you run into barriers and you can't get organizations to be responsible and acknowledge that they have systemic issues that need to be addressed, then you go around. And that's what Latasha has done. And so I just wanted to include a shout out to her and her organization. So my next slide. This movement is a spectrum. I kind of talked a little bit about that on the last slide. All of us are needed. So there are extremists saying and doing some really crazy things. And if we're just quiet or countering with a soft response, their message is going to continue to spread. And so every viewpoint is valuable when it comes to fighting against this, even those of us who may make others uncomfortable. But again, that's what the CRT work is about. It is uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable. So that is a known bug in this work. And when you realize that it's part of the work, then you realize that you're actually making progress and in the right place. So embrace that. Don't be afraid of it. But find where you fit in, because you don't necessarily have to jump in all the way at the front, I guess. Find where you fit in, and then work towards moving forward, continuing to move forward. So these extremes, we're talking about suburban school board race, and in particular is what brought this particular lesson up, and this particular video Zoom call that I wanted to put together for you guys. There is a woman running for school board in one of our suburban counties right now in Kentucky, who just recently got an endorsement from Rand Paul. And she has been touting the same experimental drugs that Rand Paul has been touting, and has been anti-mask and anti-Dr. Fauci, and part of, the reopen the schools no matter the risk, because our kids, deserve to be subjected to more trauma, and then claiming that the masks are creating trauma, and even having the nerve, the gall to compare the experiences that our Black and brown students have been having for generations, to the oppression of having to wear a mask. It's just so incredibly alarming that I think it's just a matter of time before people see the hypocrisy and the disparities, and blatantly that these are all lies that are intended to allow white supremacy to prevail. And they are doing things that are extreme, and we have to make sure that their extremism is matched. And I'm not suggesting that we break any laws, but if they've got heavy hitter endorsements for their candidates, then we need to make sure we're out there getting heavy hitter endorsements for our candidates, even if it's not clearly the moms in the group. But the moms in the group can go behind the scenes and talk to the Charles Bookers of the world or whomever, and see if we can't get the same level of support. And we are not allowed to coordinate with candidates. So maybe Charles isn't the best example because he's running, but you know what I'm saying. If we actually contact the school board member that we want to endorse and tell them that we're wanting to endorse them, that is a violation of state laws. So we have to be careful not to coordinate and violate campaign finance laws. And so the suburban moms that are afraid to do any endorsing because they think that it could put a candidate at risk are actually coordinating with the candidate, because they're having conversations with them about whether or not they should endorse them. And so we need to steer clear of that. And they are playing a game. They see this as a game. It's a game to them. And so we can't just sit back and let it happen. We have to counter their tactics with their own. We have to beat them at their own game. So keep challenging yourself to try to move in areas that you feel are uncomfortable. Try to research what's causing that discomfort. Find a mentor in the work that you can ask these types of questions, and keep moving in the right direction. We are on the right side of history here. Punch up, not down. So again, that conversation around oppressed and oppressor is valuable, because we do need to be having these types of conversations and making sure that we are pushing back on authority, pushing back on people in these positions of power that have the ability to make these changes that need to be made. Not telling the oppressed to just, they need to ask nicer, or to wait and delay, and being part of the conversation of understanding the relationship between the oppressor and the oppressed is valuable for recognizing when it is appropriate to push up and punch up, and when it is appropriate to show some grace and not punch down. So not everybody agrees, and that's okay. Like I said, there's room for all of us, and we can each do the work in the space that we feel comfortable in. And if people do agree, we just have one or two that agree, that's enough. We need to protect those in our care, especially students who don't have the same agency and advocacy, and even parental involvement. Parents are not fully aware of how long this has been going on and who is really behind it. And so we have an obligation to protect those in our care. They are our future, and they are also smarter than we realize. So we need to empower them with information so they can advocate for themselves. We can't force others to join us. So since we're on a tight time frame, instead of continuing to plead with them to join us, we need to cut our losses and keep it moving, because it only takes a few of us to move the needle, and we are enough. We need to also be respectful of others. This is consensus work. This is not a one-person show. And so when we are moving in the right direction, we're moving forward, and we're brainstorming, and we're coming up with plans. If someone in the group disagrees with our plan, like I said, we're not all going to agree. And maybe that disagreement means that person belongs somewhere else on the spectrum, because if there are still the majority of us, or even some of us, that say, well, we do think that this is a valuable tactic, and we want to keep the conversation going. We want to keep having this discussion. One person who disagrees shouldn't be able to throw a hand grenade in and stop the work. So that is common. That's a common barrier that I'm running into in this work. And so I'm still struggling there. That's an area where I am looking for some suggestions and some opportunities to improve, because I tend to just keep it moving, and someone who maybe feels uncomfortable in the space is not finding the opportunity to get out of that lane and move to a different lane, and then ends up blowing it up for everyone. And in this space, we need to be willing to be accountable, be willing to be held accountable. If I've done some things, I've done some things. I will acknowledge I've done some things just in the last 24 hours. Many of us in this work are dealing with trauma. There is a lot of trauma in this work, especially right now. And I will admit that I am easily frazzled especially because I feel that time is so short. I feel like there are only so many moves left before we can't get out of this mess. And I feel like the writing is on the wall and it's obvious. And if I'm given an opportunity to demonstrate why and how I feel the way that I do, that we can discuss it and get through it and keep it moving and help people move into that area of this that they might have initially felt uncomfortable with. But I can't do that if the conversations are abruptly derailed. And this Zoom call was intended to be an opportunity. It was on the calendar, and we were going to have a meeting with Suburban Moms. And one person in particular didn't agree with one of the tactics that was still just being brainstormed. And it went downhill quickly. And I played a role in that, and I apologize. I am willing to be held accountable for the role that I played. And I hope that others that were in that conversation are willing to do the same, because that is how we keep the work moving forward and how we bring people where we need to be. So that's consensus work and being willing to be held accountable, and along the lines of no dirty deletes, like for a couple of reasons. People take the time to write their responses in threads, whether it's chat threads or Facebook threads or what have you. But if somebody deletes something or blocks someone or removes part of a thread, it can remove the whole thread. And all that labor that people took the time to put into those responses is disrespected, but also the lesson is lost, and other people can read those threads and learn from them. So in Dear JCPS, the page that I run, it is a private group, but if we are committed to anti-racist work, and we will hold people accountable. And I leave threads in there, even if I've blocked the person or if I've even made a mistake. I leave those threads in there because we can all learn from them. And we have to be respectful of people's time and talent, not just in the threads that I mentioned, but also when people bring their talent and their time to the work. I spent 2 to 3 days in this Facebook chat with these moms, these suburban moms, and I thought everything was going great. And they were sharing memes and they were expressing that they got it. And several of them gave thumbs up when I said, let's do this and let's do that. So even if not everyone agreed, the ones who did agree are probably the ones who belong in this group. This was a group that I requested be put together. And at one point, someone was uncomfortable, and it was suggested that I leave the group. And I was the one who asked for this group to be put together, because I wanted to share my experience, my knowledge, my suggestions, because I know who these people are. This is not unique to this suburban community. This is part of something that's been taking place for 40 or 50 years at an international level. But here in the United States, for at least 40 years, the Koch brothers and Alec, and read the book Dark Money and Democracy in Chains, and even read the latest New Yorker piece that Jane Mayer just put out about the big money behind the big lie. It's the same billionaire elites that are trying to hog everything up for themselves and leave the rest of us to fight it out. And it's not sustainable, and it's going to lead to some really, really unfortunate outcomes for all of us. In the past, these outcomes have primarily affected our poor, our minorities, our disabled communities. And so they have been, this same type of stuff has been going on for generations. But because we left it unaddressed for so long, and we didn't follow through on it when we had the chance, even back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. We've reverted back to really horrible times for a lot of people. And so leaving it unaddressed has seen it shape shift into other forms of gun violence and drug abuse and harmful effects that are now affecting our white community, our wealthy community. And it's only that now that it's affecting the white community that we are all reeling from it, and we are all looking for solutions. And so what we have to make sure we do is that when we find those solutions and we implement those solutions, we implement them for the least of these. Because if we can solve for the lowest common denominator, we can solve for all of us. Everyone will benefit when we make sure that our most vulnerable communities and community members are supported and treated with respect. So we have to elevate the voices of our most marginalized community members and make space for them and be intentional about that. And that is the work that we are doing. And if you're on board with all of that, then we will continue to work to find consensus. We don't move forward until we've reached consensus or until we've reached a deadline and we have to take a vote. So the conversations that were taking place in the chat, even though they may have made people uncomfortable, were not decided by any means. But what I did object to was having people in the chat saying, no, we're not going to do this, before we had really had a chance to flesh it out. And I had been offering to be on this Zoom call and share these ideas for several days, and we just never got to that point before things really spiraled downhill. And so I apologize for that. I hope that the people that I have been chatting with do continue to do the work as they said they're going to do and operate in a space that is needed. We need that work. But if anyone is interested in truly confronting anti-racism or confronting anti-CRT and other racist ideologies, and putting ourselves in, using our privilege really to work to expose and dismantle the things that are harmful, because they're not going to expose and dismantle themselves. And I will just say the last thing on this slide. The group that I've been speaking with is considers themselves to be a liberal group. And one of my frustrations in working with liberal groups, and I am a liberal, so I can say this, is that we tend to think that we are already woke. We tend to think that we already get it and that we're not the problem. And so we don't listen to the lesson that we're trying to get others to listen to. And we tend to sell out and sell short the work. And so we can be some of the worst obstructionists, gatekeepers, and even cowards. We're chicken. We're chicken. Because when we get uncomfortable and something feels divisive and we don't want to lose our friendships or our family relationships or what have you, we just stop rocking the boat, right? And that allows the harm to continue. And so we have to find other ways around, and we have to be there for each other. We have to support each other, because none of us knows all the answers, and none of us have had every single possible experience, but many of us have had some of these same experiences, and we can learn from each other and share and grow and be there so that we know you're not crazy. You're right here. You're not wrong. So let's, or maybe you are wrong, and we could try a different approach and be receptive to that kind of feedback. So we talked a little bit about who's behind it. Alec and the Koch brothers for sure. The Heritage Foundation is another group that's been here locally. The Tea Party, the Libertarians and the Tea Party were the group that was behind the derailment of the tax increase. There's a whole connect the dots piece that I put out on dearjcps.com. And then also the New Yorker piece that I mentioned is worth checking out. Some of the other groups are part of the national effort, and they shapeshift and find a new way to infiltrate in our communities. And so even these local let them learn groups and Moms for Liberty and all of that are really driven by the same national playbook. So just learn to recognize it. And if you have any questions about whether or not it is, bring it to the group and let's research it. Many of us have seen it before and recognize it right off the bat and can point you to where else we've seen it and introduce you to people in other states that can tell us this is how it presented itself. This is the order it happened in. This is when they did this, and then they created this, and then this is how they found a backdoor way in. We've seen it. We've been watching it. So be sure to consult the resources that exist in the years and years of grassroots efforts that have been going on. And it is all related, whether they're anti-mask or anti-CRT or demanding schools be open or stripping the governor of his executive powers that caused NTI to not be an option this year. And they do it in 2 to 3 steps, so you don't always see cause and effect, so you can't hold these lawmakers accountable. But that's part of the work that we're doing, is we're going to make sure that people know who voted how and how they kind of made this House Bill 208 into kind of a double negative type situation, and it backfired on them. They didn't get what they wanted, and so you could see the conservatives that were behind the stripping of the powers having a little meltdown because they lost the piece of the bill that they really, really, really wanted, which would have forced schools to reopen in person last school year, but now they are being forced this year. So I guess they still won, because now we're not having the same conversations and we're just as much in the red now as ever. And things are worse than they were. So this is what I'm talking about. When you let them have little bits, then they end up creeping in and getting more. So we have to match their responses. We have to be matching their efforts with counter responses, and we're not doing enough. I can guarantee you, every day more and more of our rights and our freedoms are eroded, and it's time that stops. And if you are in agreement, then let's talk about what we're going to do about that. Voter suppression is another big piece of the puzzle that they're working on. Gerrymandering our districts so that their authoritarian leaders can never be removed. They call themselves patriots. Freedom, Trump, insurrection, all of that is related to what we're seeing here locally. And it's all tied to the same thing. And it's essentially a slow motion insurrection. It's the same thing that took place in our Capitol on January 6th. It's happening through backdoor channels in our state legislatures and our school boards by having these radical right-wing extremists taking over, and we have to prevent that from happening. And that is why I wanted to talk to school boards outside of Jefferson County yes, it's different in your community, but there are ways to be strategic and collaborative and effective. And you don't even have to believe or follow all of my advice, but I would really like an opportunity to share these experiences and these suggestions before you dismiss what I have to say without even hearing it. So we can talk about that further. Some some of the things that we can expect in the 2022 legislative session is sewer bill tactics. You may be familiar with the pension bill and the way they crammed it through. We saw more of that, like I said, during the pandemic. The voucher bill that passed this past session was complete lies and a complete they lied in the committee meetings, and they obstructed stakeholder voices from being heard, and they pushed through the vote before people could read or comment on the language in the bill. And it was very much more sewer bill tactics. And as long as they have the supermajority in the House and the Senate, they're going to continue to do that. We do have a Democratic governor who can veto bills, but if any bill is vetoed, if they leave themselves the last 2 days of session, they can override any vetoes in those last 2 days. So those last 2 days are actually some pretty critical days. And I do hope that you will go out to my Facebook page. Today is August 15th, 2021. About an hour and a half ago, maybe at 1:30, I guess, 1 or 1:30 in the afternoon, I posted some screenshots from a book that I do hope you'll go look at. It was written by two JCPS teachers, Tia Edison and Yvonne. Well, the book was written by a couple of teachers in another state, but chapter 9 was written by teachers Tia Edison and Yvonne Rivera, JCPS teachers, and the book is called Strike for the Common Good, Fighting for the Future of Public Education. And chapter 9 is the chapter that I'm referencing that can tell you a little bit of our local history or the backstory that people didn't see, but I witnessed it, I lived it, so I concur wholeheartedly that these are the things that took place. And it's called The Anti-Racist Struggle in the Kentucky Teachers Strike. Miss Edison is a teacher of color, as is Miss Rivera. And so it's really important that you know from teachers firsthand who witnessed and experienced some of the infighting that has taken place. So this is common to have these types of experiences. I wish I knew a better way to prevent it from happening. But I do hope that you'll go read about how there will be people who are our allies who will derail our work. And oftentimes it involves the true anti-racism work when people feel uncomfortable in the work. They accuse us of being divisive. They accuse us of being hateful. They accuse us of stirring the pot. That's a common buzzword. So just be aware and just realize that this is nothing new, and we will get through this just like we have gotten through these other experiences. We can expect more lies, even in committee hearings and floor testimony, which I mentioned before. We can expect an erosion of protections. These are things like site-based decision-making council losing its ability to make decisions at the local level. They erode, they chip away the number of parents, the number of teachers, the number of schools, etc., and even their ability. So when it comes time to fix something, we're looking at Band-Aids instead of restoring things the way they were. We can expect more gaslighting and people feeling isolated, told that they're alone. The cult-like behaviors that we witness from some of these leaders who manipulate their members and their body of membership into protecting the cult instead of doing the right thing for the right reasons, even though they claim that protecting the cult is for the greater good. So just be wary of those types of behaviors and how people that present themselves as allies could actually have been groomed by cult leaders to facilitate that misconception and that misdirection of energy and efforts. And also lots of money. When things start to work, when we start to do well, you can expect them to pour money into a nearby. It may not even be directly related, but you can expect money pouring into something that drowns out the efforts of grassroots organizations and people. And so what can we do? We can speak at board meetings. We need to counter protest and hold press conferences so people recognize that the crazy radical right that is so vocal is not the majority. We need to put forth a comparable response, or they will continue to grow, and people will think that they're the majority, and they will yield to them. They will bend to them. Our board members will feel pressured to give in to them because they think that appearance-wise, they are the majority. And even if they know they're not the majority, they feel obligated to give in to them because they feel like all eyes are on them, and people will think that they were biased if they don't. But the thing is these people are not truly concerned about education. They are not truly concerned about our kids. They are not truly concerned about democracy. And so we elected our board members to do the right things for us. And so they need to put information in the compartments that they belong in. And false news is false news is false news, no matter how many people repeat it. So board members need to know that we're watching them and that we're holding them accountable, because if they allow these people to get in this open seat when they have the ability to choose, this particular race that I'm referring to, the board will select the replacement because it's a vacancy that took place between elections. So the existing board members will be the ones to choose the replacement. So they need to be asked before. We can't leave them any wiggle room and any weasel room. They need to be asked, do you agree that this fake news is dangerous and irresponsible, and people who are espousing this information should not serve on the board? We want an answer before they end up appointing this person, because then they'll have some excuse that after the fact they can say is the reason they did what they did. If you get them on record ahead of time, you're more likely to get them to do the right thing, especially if you also are successful in growing your base and getting more people to watch and pay attention and comment. And document. Make sure that you have blogged it or screenshotted it or put it out there for others to see, because if they can claim they didn't know better or what have you, they will. So be sure to email them, because any emails you send are public record and we can request those after the fact, and demonstrate that they were informed. They can't claim they didn't know. Circulate a petition. Put some pressure on the board to recognize how many people actually disagree with this loud, vocal minority, and get some petition signatures. But that also allows you to capture email addresses and find out what districts people live in and get them to show up at the next thing, because now you have their information. So that's a no-brainer. Join our coalition, the Coalition for the People's Agenda Education Committee. We have signed on to the national brief that was put out by Kevin Kushamiro, I believe is how you pronounce his name. I'm probably not saying that correctly. Kumashiro. There is a national brief that has been circulated that we have signed on to that has all of the things that we've been talking about. You can sign on to that coalition and be part of a broader movement and build that wall. We need to build a fence. We need to build a fence that is harder for them to penetrate. And in the marketing world, we call it putting ears on the elephant. We need to, if we're coordinated and we've got people in all the right places, we can use that fence to prevent them from getting through. Because if we lose just one battle, we've lost the war. This is like a flood, and we have to hold up the dam. And you know, when the water gets through one area, the water gets through. So even if rural and suburban districts think that they don't need Jefferson County involved in their local politics, I understand that. And it is different. I'm not going to argue that I know how things are in other communities, but we can share our experiences with you, and you can take what you like and leave the rest, and we can brainstorm until we agree that this is a better tactic than this. And when you've got buy-in from the people that are wanting to do the work, then you've got more people showing up. So let's keep talking about it. That's all I really want, is to just keep talking about it until we've come up with what we agree as a group is the best decision. And we never got there in our chat yesterday. So hold town halls, make sure people hear your voices and opinions in more ways than just at the 3-minute meetings that nobody really tunes into. Cut out those 3-minute tapes and share them for others to hear as well. Write blog posts. Get those screenshots that show how she endorsed that experimental drug, and how she's getting endorsements from Rand Paul, and how she's serving on as an expert witness on the lawsuit against the Attorney General. It's clearly politically motivated, and if we can put that into a blog post that makes it easy for people to see what we've been seeing without having to be in the right place at the right time and come across the same things that you've seen, let's do that. Let's make it easy. Write letters to the editor at your local paper. Tap into the student voice at your schools. Your children can organize and contact board members and make videos and TikTok videos. And it doesn't have to be confrontational or uncomfortable. There are ways to get your message out that feels good. And again, this is righteous work. We're on the right side of history. It all feels good. It really does. Let's have protests in the districts where these bill sponsors live. Let's embarrass them. Let's make sure their community knows that there are a lot of us that are not happy with these bills. And let's coordinate so that we can support each other. We can be at each other's events and be at each other's rallies like they're doing. We don't have to do this alone, and not everyone can be at everything. So you may not be able to make the meeting on Tuesday, but you can make the meeting next Tuesday. And so you show up in my district, I'll show up in yours, because my schedule is more copacetic. You know, let's not write anyone off as not belonging. We need to meet with site-based decision-making councils and PTA groups and make sure they know what's at stake and what's been happening, and that things are not on autopilot. Things are not going well on autopilot, and it's time for us to take the steering wheel and steer this plane back in the right direction. And then endorsements by impacted groups. Let's talk about this. This is the sensitive topic that ultimately caused our communication breakdown, because some people in the group did not want to endorse one of the candidates who has thrown their hat into the ring. And first of all, endorsement can mean a lot of different things, and it doesn't have to be at the individual level, but we need to be able to talk about how do we advocate for what we want instead, who we want instead in that role. Yes, we can say we don't want this person that has these scary beliefs And that may not be the same time and place to say this is who we want instead. But in Jefferson County, our organizations, our grassroots organizations endorse candidates. And in these suburban counties, maybe your organizations could get involved, or maybe you could create your own grassroots organization that can endorse the candidates so that people still know who the good guys are, because we need to make sure people know who the good guys are, because the deadline to file for this particular race is September 1st. And if we say we don't want this person, and they realize this person is about to not get selected because they've gone over the top, they might still be able to sneak in a second person that still hasn't been as vocal, that was wise enough to not be as vocal with their false news, but they can choose that person and say, oh, well, we thought they were just as good or whatever, and you can't hold anyone accountable after that. So time is of the essence, because as I mentioned, they're going to be voting. This board is going to be voting on September 7th, and or interviewing, I should say, on September 7th, and voting shortly after that. So once it's done, and then there will be a general election in 2022, and incumbents are more likely to win. So once they pick someone, that person is likely to stay in power. But also there's other seats that can be taken. And then when you've got 3 of the 5 that have been put there by privatizers, then they're going to do whatever they want to do, just like we're seeing our state General Assembly doing. So we have to stop this. We're running out of time. We're running out of chances. I'm sorry if my message comes across as pushy and intense, but I truly feel like it's now or never, and we've got to do anything and everything to stop this and reverse this. We have to reverse this. So if you live in one of these suburban or rural counties and you're watching this video, there are other races that we need to be aware of, and I want to hear from you. I want to know other communities that we need to also be paying close attention to. And let me know who your board member is, and let's make sure that we've got someone in every community, in every district, that has a direct line to a school board member and a state senator and a House rep. Like, let's make sure we've got someone in every county and every district that is a constituent of the people who we need to have listening to us. And let's have a coordinated effort. And I'm just one person. This isn't about me. If there's something about working with me in particular that makes you uncomfortable, please reach out to others in the group. Please listen to our Black educators in particular, and our Black moms and dads and guardians of Black children, because this may not feel like it affects everyone in every county and every district, but it truly does. But Jefferson County is where we have the highest concentration of schools with Black students, and that's where the harm is happening the most. And so even though other counties, other districts may say we don't need Jefferson County, you may not need us. I agree, you don't need us. But we can't leave it in your hands, because it affects us. It affects our students and our community the most. And others may, because it's not something they see and feel on a daily basis, may think it's, whatever, there's a million things we need to be worried about, and so this isn't on your radar. That will be what allows this bill to pass. because we don't have enough lawmakers in Jefferson County. Even though Jefferson County lawmakers, for the most part, recognize how harmful this bill is, their votes aren't enough to stop it. So we truly need to reach out to our districts statewide and make sure they understand the seriousness of what's at stake and the role that each of our districts and counties and communities needs to play, and do so in a way that stops this legislation from passing. So please visit our websites. I don't think I have any more slides here. Please visit thepeoplesagenda.net for our coalition page. And also, we are launching a campaign called All History Matters, which will have tools and resources and the brief that you can sign on to, and petitions. We'll get all of that information onto that website, and that web address is allhistorymatters.com. So please join us on Facebook, in the Dear JCPS group, in the Save Our Schools group. Like our pages on Facebook as well. And my email address is moderator@dearjcps.com. It's moderator@dearjcps.com. I would love to hear from you. Let me know that you were able to watch this video and what you think. I appreciate your feedback.